Good morning. I'm Stas Margaronis. This is the Propeller Club of Northern California. It is April 1st, and our guest is Lars Jensen, who is going to be giving us a global shipping report. We are going to get an introduction from the Venerable Peter Friedman, Executive Director, Agriculture Transportation Coalition. And as usual, I am accompanied by my IT colleague, Todd Crawshaw. And I'm going to wait for just a second to get everybody in, and then we will start doing the introductions because we've got to go quickly since we have a lot on our agenda today. So I am going to start. Todd, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, hi. Company's Crawshaw Design. We provide website design, development, hosting, and IT, and much more.
Peter Friedman, good morning.
Good morning to you out there on the West Coast.
You want to introduce yourself, Peter?
Yeah, Peter Friedman, Executive Director of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition, and also with customs brokers and freight forwarders on the West Coast and so on. I am looking forward to seeing some of you this summer at our annual meeting in Tacoma. We'll have 600 people there. And we'll talk about a lot of these issues that are going to come up today. Let me first...
Peter, hold that thought because we need to go through the rest of the introductions and I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
Just hold on. Okay. Yeah. Peter Dreyfus.
Good morning. I represent and am co-owner of Watermaster North America. We make a shallow water 40-foot dredging machine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Swan. Mike?
Hello.
Hi. Introduce yourself.
I am end of voyage manager at Storm Geo. So I work with the voyage performance reports, and I analyze performance
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Aaron.
Yes, good morning from rainy San Jose. I'm Aaron D. Hart, and I'm the director of the Voyage Performance Services and Analytics Department at Storm Geo.
Thank you, Aaron. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Stas.
Thank you. Dave Arsenault. Good morning, Mr. Arsenault.
Well, good morning, Stas. How are you this morning?
Not too bad.
And good morning, Lars, and everyone else on the call here. Dave Arsenault. I'm the president of GSC Enterprises based out of Oakland, California.
Very good. And I see your comrade in arms, Mr. Scott Taylor, is also with us. Good morning, Mr. Taylor.
That's a good way to put it, comrade. Okay, well, thank you, Stas. Looking forward to, I want to hear more about Lars, what he has to say, than listening to me. So my name is Scott Taylor. I'm CEO, chairman of the board of GSC Enterprises. Thank you for putting this together, Stas.
Thank you very much, Scott. Sophie Silvestri. Sophie, good morning.
Good morning. Sophie Silvestri with the Pasha Group. I'm Director of Commercial and External Affairs. Nice to see you all.
Very good. It's great to have you again, Sophie. Ryan Edmeister. Ryan, good morning.
Hello, good morning, Stas, and good morning to you all. Cadet First Class Ryan Edmeister of the California Maritime Academy, current president of the Cal Maritime Propeller Club, and commissioning as a ground officer in the United States Marine Corps.
Very good, and we're looking forward to your commissioning in June there, Ryan.
Thank you. Very excited.
Thank you. Dennis Dysinger. Dennis, good morning.
Yeah, hey, Stas. Sorry I've been MIA. Dennis Dysinger with Maritime and Logistics Management. I'm going to do a shameful little plug here, doing a lot of mentoring up at Cal Maritime. Know Ryan very well. So if anybody on this chat has an internship or anything else that I could help with the career services up there, poke me on the side. Thanks, Stas.
Very good. Chris Lambert. Chris?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Chris Lambert, Head of Operations at TraPac Oakland. It's nice to talk and see everybody.
Chris, great having you again with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Stas.
I see Emmanuel's phone. Who's Emmanuel?
Hey, good morning. This is Manuel Tischler, Foss Maritime, also the recipient of some internet issues in the office here.
Okay. Good having you with us. Thank you for being with us. Ethan Lee. Ethan?
Hi, I'm Ethan Lee. I'm a student at Cal Maritime too, and I'm also here with the Propeller Club here. So.
Very good. Welcome. Josh S. Who's Josh S?
Hello. I'm a voyage performance analyst at Storm Geo and joining from the East Coast. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much, Josh. Kevin Claypool. Kevin, good morning.
Good morning. Kevin Claypool here. I'm a commercial banker with Five Star Bank. We are a high-touch commercial bank that focuses on lending and deposit services. And I am focused on the maritime industry. Happy to be here, everyone.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Good to see you again. Kevin Policarpo. Kevin, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Policarpo. I work as Stas's research assistant and for any topic you want.
Thank you, Kevin.
Do you want me to take notes for this?
Yes, go ahead. Lars, good morning. Lars, you want to introduce yourself? You're muted.
Oh, I was muted. Sorry about that. Yeah. Hey, Lars here. I am just your regular humble analyst trying to figure out what goes on in container shipping.
Thank you very much. Matthew LaFiandra. Matthew, good morning.
Morning, everybody. Matt LaFiandra, Ocean Solutions. We're a broker of ocean freight, particularly on the bulk side, tankers and dry bulk, and also quite active in the derivatives market for hedging the global freight markets. And very interested in what Peter and Lars have to say today. Because
you're a member of the Propeller Club of Northern California.
Certainly am. Very
and
proud
you live
member.
just down the street
and a neighbor of
that
Stas.
coffee invitation.
How about this week, buddy?
Yes.
Let's go. All right, let's do it.
Okay, give me a time and place. I will see you.
Friday.
Okay, you're
Noon.
on. Okay, I'll see you then. Thank you.
All right.
I'll get back to you and send you an invite.
All right.
Mike Chapman. Mike Chapman, good morning. Mike? Okay, we will get Mike, you're muted. I know you're here. Mike.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, Mike?
Hi, good morning.
You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Mike Chapman, a member of the Propeller Club of Northern California, member of the Women's Propeller Club, Port of the Golden Gate, the only last one in the United States. We support our ships, the World War II ships, the Jeremiah O'Brien, the Red Oak Victory, and we give scholarships to California Maritime students, retired San Francisco firemen, 32 years service.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mike. Mike Swan, did I introduce you? I can't remember.
Yes, you did. Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh.
Stan Maupin. Oh, you've already been. Where are there redwoods in Redwood City?
Not anymore.
No.
Stan Maupin, commissioner with the Port of Redwood City, and Stas, as always, thanks for putting these together. It's really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Stan. Ron Brown, Vice President of the Propeller Club of Northern California. Good morning, Mr. Brown.
Good morning, Stas, and good morning, everyone. And I'm always interested in knowing what Stas is sipping every morning. It looks like a scotch to me, Stas. Good morning, everyone.
It's tea. I swear it's tea. Okay. We have Steve Schlinkert.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great pronunciation of the name. You got it right. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Steve Schlinkert. I'm an assistant manager in the voyage performance department at Storm Geo. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. Well, great to have you. Sung Lee. Sung, good morning.
Hello. I am the president of Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association of Northern California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. And Tony Petronio. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, Stas. Good morning, everybody. Tony Petronio, Operations Director, Routing Advisory Services, and really looking forward to hearing Lars's take on our present challenges.
Very good. Thank you very much, guys. Todd, have I got everybody? Because the names keep moving around.
I got distracted by a phone call coming in, but did you get Susan Ransom?
Susan Ransom. How could I miss Susan Ransom? She's on my board. And she's going to pay her dues this week.
Not if you don't introduce me.
Susan, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Susan Ransom, Client Relations Manager at SSA Terminal in Oakland and board member of the Propeller Club.
Thank you, Susan. Okay. And I see Charles Gerard has shown up.
Sorry,
Mr.
I'm a few
Gerard,
minutes late.
good morning.
Good morning. Charles Gerard, Director of the Port of Richmond. So thanks for extending the invite. Lars, I spent many years with Navis, so I'm familiar with your work, but I was mostly working in Asia, so I don't think we crossed paths too much.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, now have I gotten everybody? Todd.
I don't know. Speak up if you haven't.
So yeah, I'm new to this. My name's Mike Clare. I serve on the Redwood City Port Commission with Stan. And there are redwood trees in Redwood City.
And there are trees in Redwood City?
Few redwood trees.
Mike, thank you very much. Welcome and glad that you could make it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I am, without further ado, going to introduce the venerable Peter Friedman, Executive Director of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition, and he's already referenced that they have their annual meeting in Tacoma on June 16th. And Peter is going to introduce Lars, but I've asked Peter to give us a very short report about the testimony that happened last week on the U.S. Trade Representative's proposed actions on Chinese ships and Chinese shipbuilding. There is a proposal to tax or find an assessment of $1.5 million per ship that is built in China, arriving at U.S. ports. Peter, could you give us a little overview of what happened last week and what the projections are?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Stas, for organizing these. Last week, there was a hearing on the U.S. Trade Representative's initiative to address what they call China's global dominance of shipbuilding. It's been discovered all of a sudden, well, about 2 years ago, that about 90% of the world's ship construction is taking place in China. And that depending on whether you're talking bulk or break bulk or container vessels, between 50 and 80% of the world's fleet is either built in China or owned by Chinese interests. And so they studied this for 2 years under the Biden administration. And then 2 days before President Trump or Donald Trump is sworn in as president, they released this 301 initiative, which would impose rather dramatic fees on U.S. exports and imports designed to, in part, raise money, but in part to discourage people from shipping on Chinese ships. As you can detect, if 80% of the world ships are made in China or owned by Chinese, it's going to be very hard to ship any place without having to pay this fee. And this fee is only applying to imports and exports to the U.S. At a TPM, the president of the world's largest container carrier, MSC, said that as this fee will be between 1 and 1.5 million, or as it could, fees could be stacked up to $3 million per port call, that MSC would have to consolidate their calls on only the ports where they can bring the largest ships and have the largest volume of cargo over which to amortize these fees. He said very specifically, we'll call on LA Long Beach, but not Oakland. What MSC will do is probably what other carriers will do if they proceed. He will probably drop as well Portland, Seattle, Tacoma in favor of Vancouver, where there's no fee for calling on Vancouver, Canada. So this has created a lot of alarms if the carriers are going to drop Oakland in favor of LA Long Beach carriage. In addition, on the export side, there's a mandate, and I won't go into all the detail, but a certain percentage of U.S. export cargo will have to go on U.S. flagged ships, that is, U.S. crew, and would have to be, after a couple more years, shipped on U.S. built ships, of which we have none in the United States that are capable, competent to modern trans-Pacific, transatlantic transport, container transport. The largest I think we have is 3.6 thousand TEUs that Matson has, but you need, as Lars can attest, 5, 6 or more thousand just to go across the ocean economically. And we don't have any of those, nor have we ever in the US built a container ship that carries 16, 18,000 TEUs, which are the ships that the president of Maersk hopes to load in LA and Long Beach, not Oakland. So these are the challenges that are ahead. We can say this, that the farm state senators and congresspeople are very concerned. They are the red states, and there are quite a few actual MAGA congressmen from those areas with whom I've been discussing this, who are communicating with the MAGA leadership, the president, on why this is not a feasible scheme, because we don't want to knock U.S. agriculture completely out of the global market. You cannot increase the transportation costs and keep our very fungible agricultural goods, which can be sourced from any other country in the world as well. You cannot keep them competitive. So that there's going to be more on April 17. USTR is going to have some announcement, and this is going to continue for a bit. So that's what we have, and that's what you have at stake in the Bay Area, as well as many other ports around the country. With that, let me introduce Lars Jensen. Lars is in Denmark, in Copenhagen. He began his career early on with steamship lines with Maersk. He has great credibility among the steamship industry and among the shipper side too. His company, Vespucci Maritime, is highly credible. You will recall that when the ocean carriers were first attacked by the Houthis and decided they were not going to call or transit the Red Sea and instead go all the way around Africa, they suddenly announced a massive surcharge, which the Federal Maritime Commission, in a very disgusting display of incompetence, quickly approved a sudden surcharge on less than 30 days notice, which is otherwise required in the law, provided a waiver. And while the shippers, the exporters, importers were very upset about this sudden surcharge, when Lars Jensen spoke up and said, wait, when you do a calculation of the additional cost of going around Africa, it will be additional cost, but certainly nothing to require a surcharge, as which the ocean carriers were suddenly announcing and imposing. even while cargo is already on the ships going across. So when Lars spoke up, that's when everybody paid attention. I mean, I can complain all I want, but the carriers, when they hear Lars Jensen raise a point about what is reasonable charge or not, they all paid attention, and that gave us great credibility. And since then, I have never strayed far from Lars Jensen, because anything I say, if Lars agrees, it's credible. If he disagrees, it's not. So, Lars, thank you very much for joining us. You're widely recognized all over the world. And I think, Stas, wonderful job on your part, able to get Lars to spend some time with this group today. Well done.
Thank you, Peter, for that very generous introduction. Let's see if I can live up to it here. Let me see if I can get my slides to share. Bear with me a second. My computer is a little bit slow today.
And Lars, if I could just, I just want to recognize two people who came in. Sue Sullivan with Pasha. Sue, good morning. I'm glad you're with us. And Eric Larson. Eric, I saw you just came in. Welcome as well. So, okay, Lars, you've got the floor.
All right, let's jump straight into it. And I'm happy that Stas said I had 4 hours, because that's the minimum we need to go through all that's interesting. So let's jump straight into it. I'm going to go through some of this a little bit faster than others to focus on what's particularly pertinent for you as an audience here. I'm going to start out with the tsunami of tariffs, which I think is the best way to describe the last couple of months. And I think, as everybody has realized, this is certainly not over yet. I mean, we've been promised another tsunami of reciprocal tariffs tomorrow. Let's see if the administration will wait until tomorrow, or will we get some of them already today. The intention is not here to go through all of them. What I would rather add is a few other comments. One thing is, nobody should expect any stable environment anytime soon when it comes to the tariffs. And the challenge here is that actually makes it impossible to adjust the supply chains to fit the new reality, because we don't know what the reality for tariffs then is a week down the line, or 2 weeks, or 4 weeks. We might have an idea what, for example, the US administration is going to do next, but then there will be retaliation from other countries, and on we go. And in that environment, it's impossible to plan a medium to long-term new supply chain, because we don't know what the environment will be. And we already have seen retaliations from China and Canada. We have seen some retaliation, and EU has vowed to come with more after we get reciprocal tariffs tomorrow, making life much more complicated. Will be the realm of new secondary tariffs. The one that was announced first is whichever country buys oil from Venezuela is going to have a specific tariff on that. Iran might be the next one. And the problem with this is, just to make a practical example, there might be a private company in Spain that imports oil from Venezuela. That's not under the control of the Spanish government, yet all other Spanish companies will now be subject to tariffs from the US. This is going to make customs and tariffs very, very complicated. Also, what we're now seeing, this might create unusual bedfellows. Yesterday, we saw an announcement from China, Japan, and South Korea. They usually don't act in unison, but not having spoken for 5 years, they now had an economic summit and agreed to make a joint alliance to retaliate on US tariffs. So this whole tariff tsunami and things that are changing almost by the day, I don't see any kind of stability anytime soon. So sadly, all importers and exporters will have to model their way through a constantly changing landscape. In terms of changing landscapes, here's one that's unlikely to change in the near to medium term future. That's the Red Sea crisis. There was hope early in the year with the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that we might see the end also of the Red Sea crisis. The developments the last 2.5 weeks have brought us back to square one. We are now at a point where there is no ceasefire in effect up in Israel and Gaza, and there have been constant US attacks on the Houthis the last 2.5 weeks. What I see here is a situation that's not going to be solved for months. And when I say solved, It's not from the perspective whether US military strikes on Yemen are or are not effective. That's not really the gauge here. The gauge is when will we reach a point where major shipping lines will send a ship worth $1 billion together with cargo through the Red Sea. So it's not enough that the US is conducting successful military strikes. We need to make sure no ships can get shot at. My own assessment of this is we're looking the other side of peak season, realistically. We should be very optimistic if it's before that. So we're talking October, November. So for peak season, we're still going to be strapped for capacity globally, at least in a baseline scenario. When I say strapped for capacity, that might sound a little bit strange, especially to some of the importers, because what we have been seeing, both on the Trans-Pacific and also on the Asia-Europe trade, has been a significant decline in spot rate levels ever since basically January. Spot rates always decline after Chinese New Year. That is seasonality. But the decline we have seen is much more sustained and much deeper than what we have been used to. So the question is, why are at least the head haul trades, so from Asia to Europe and Asia to North America, why are they weak? Will this weakness persist into the peak season, or will it abate? A little more on that, but before I go that far, I also want to point out something that I find peculiar. That is the backhaul freight rates. So it's the US exporters on the Trans-Pacific and the European exporters on the Asia-Europe trade. As we got hit by the Red Sea crisis, interestingly enough, Pacific backhaul rates did not explode, but what then subsequently happened over most of 24 was a gradual increase in export freight rates. Slight decline as we got into this year. Now it's getting a little bit up. And we saw the exact opposite on Asia-Europe, where the Red Sea crisis instantly caused a spike. Of course, they're much more directly impacted by the Red Sea, but then there's been abating all along. So the dynamics in export pricing for European exports versus US exports to Asia has been very, very different from each other over the past year. But back to the head haul and in terms of why that is weak. If we look at vessel utilization, the problem measuring vessel utilization, for that matter, demand is data is always lagged. Some of the best data is either from container trade statistics, they measure at time of loading, or it could be in the US, for example, from Pierce data. But keep in mind, Pierce data for the imports measure when the cargo arrives in the US, which of course is still lagged compared to when it was actually loaded. But with the data we have, at least so far, there has been a dip in utilization as we got into 2025. The question is then, is that because demand is weak? Is it because there's too much capacity? We should understand that before we can say whether we're going to get a strong peak season or not. And if we look at the demand side of the equation, basically what all the numbers are telling us is, yes, demand is still holding up relatively firm. We do have strong demand, and we still go around Africa. That also helps that demand part. But even without the African element, we have strong demand. So that means there's only one other element that can explain why spot rates are suddenly going down. That must be capacity. And if I look at capacity, what I did here was I looked at 2024 versus 2025 and looked how much did capacity grow? How much capacity did the carriers put in? And the blue bars here, those are the 8 weeks before Chinese New Year. The orange bars is the capacity growth in the 8 weeks after Chinese New Year. And note, Chinese New Year changes year on year. So I compensated. So we actually overlay them so they match exactly with the Chinese New Year periods. And what this shows us is Asia-Europe, the carriers have increased capacity by no less than 27% year on year. Asia, North American East Coast was actually slightly down, for all intents and purposes, more or less the same. We are 15% up on capacity on the Pacific into the US West Coast, rather than North American West Coast. So it doesn't matter that demand is holding up fairly strong. It is no match for this very significant capacity injection by the carriers. So I see the current weakness in rates as the carriers injecting too much capacity. The next question is, why did they do that? I don't think they intended to, but the carriers have a larger priority these months, and that is to phase in their new networks. They're all changing to new alliances, new collaboration partners. And it's a very elaborate operation when you need to then shift 300 ships from one set of schedules to another set of schedules. So the carriers have operational target lock in getting these new services into place. When you do that, it becomes very, very difficult to cancel some of your sailings, which is what they would usually do to better match supply to demand. So spot rates are weak because we got too much supply. We got too much supply because the carriers have their eyes on transitioning to the new alliances. What that tells us is that this is temporary. This means that as the new alliance networks get firmly into place, carriers will become better at again canceling sailings, and we're going to get a strengthening of rates again going into peak season. We can already begin to see this. It depends a little bit on which data sources. You can look at Sea Intelligence, you can look at Drewry out there, but for basically the next 4 to 5 weeks on the Atlantic, on the Trans-Pacific, on Asia, Europe, we are talking something like 50, 60, 70 blank sailings across all the carriers. So the carriers are now indeed beginning to ramp up on blank sailings, again, matching with their new services are more or less getting into place. So the weakness in spot rates, we might expect this to last maybe a few weeks more, but as we get into May, this is going to be reversed. One word here on reliability. It has, of course, been awful. It's been awful basically ever since the pandemic hit us. It was bad last year as well. I'm not going to belabor the overall development over the last 10 plus years. What I would take a little bit of cue from is some of the measurements from Sea Intelligence that came out a couple of days ago on the new alliances. Now, mind you, these are only a few arrivals, the ones that were actually phased in. So it is not the entire portfolio of Gemini. It's not the entire portfolio of MSC's new services or Premier Alliance new services. It is the subset that have now actually been implemented during February. But all of these 3 new alliances are showing performance levels significantly above where we were in 2024. So again, this is the first early measurements, but I think that, and people might see this as possibly only the positive news I have during this whole presentation, but I genuinely believe reliability across all the alliances will improve here in 2025 as we get the new services in place. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't, because we are going to continue to have a stable environment around Africa. Yes, it's longer, but we can plan for it. So reliability is definitely going up. If we look into 2025, what's going to happen if, as I mentioned, the Red Sea crisis might not be resolved? And basically, if we look at it from a full year perspective, market peak was 2024. It was extremely strong at an annual average, not as strong as during the pandemic, but we were up there. 2025 is also going to be a strong peak season, but not as strong as last year. We have had more vessels delivered since last year, so there's a little bit more slack in terms of capacity out there. So the baseline everybody should be planning for is a peak season 2025, especially for the importers, that is stronger than usual, but not as strong as what we saw last year. That's the baseline. I would raise a warning note here. There is, in my view, increased uncertainty about a sudden US market downturn. If we get a US market downturn, that would likely be triggered by US consumers pulling back. That would trigger an inventory correction, and that could cause Trans-Pacific demand volumes to drop very, very rapidly. That is a scenario that should be taken into account, but at least as of now, I wouldn't see it as a baseline scenario. That's if the Red Sea is not resolved. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on if the Red Sea is reopening, because that is likely to only happen, say, October, November later this year. But just keep in mind that when it does, it's going to lead to probably 2 to 3 months of very severe port congestion in Europe. You might sit over in the US and say, what do we care? It's a European problem. But it isn't, because this is port congestion in Europe, which means it's going to impact all of the Atlantic services. And as we learned the hard way also during the pandemic, port congestion means vessels being absorbed sitting at anchor. That reduces capacity globally, and there's a ripple effect on everyone. Are we then going to get overcapacity once all of it is solved? Absolutely yes. Once the Red Sea is opened, and once we have fixed the port congestion in Europe, that's the major caveat, then we are indeed going to have significant global overcapacity. The market has a cyclical downturn. It's right now just being masked by the need to go around Africa. That will be revealed again when we can go through the Red Sea. And when that happens, yeah, rates are going to collapse. Not immediately, as I said. It's going to be several months with port congestion in Europe, but after that, yes, rates are going to collapse. Why are they going to collapse? Well, first of all, think Q4 2023. Q4 2023, most carriers were loss-making because rates were extremely low because there was overcapacity. That was just a fact. Since then, global capacity has grown more than 10%. Global demand has grown 6%. So if we now can go through the Red Sea again, yes, there will be overcapacity slightly worse than what we had at the end of 2023. That will cause freight rates to come down real quick. Carriers will likely argue there's a limit as to how low the rates can go because their costs are higher. That's true. Their costs are indeed higher. But as we also saw in Q4 23, that certainly does not prevent spot rates from dropping below a cost break even, and they're likely to do it again. Another argument you will hear out there is an enormous amount of capacity to be scrapped. That is true. There's almost been no scrapping for 5 years. So there's likely 6 to 8% capacity to be scrapped. And you can easily make the argument, if you then remove those 8%, there's not going to be overcapacity. It's going to sound compelling. The reality is more murky. The reality is from the point where freight rates begin to drop, there's typically a 4 to 6 months lag before we see a pickup in scrapping, because these vessels need to come off charter first. Then the owners have to come to the realization, I'm not going to be able to find a new charterer, and then make the decision to scrap them. And then secondary, we're not going to see 8% capacity scrapped from 1 month to the next. That's a process that's likely going to take a couple of years. So conceptually, it's true. Overcapacity will to some degree be fixed by scrapping vessels, but it's going to be a long and slow process. It's not going to help the initial crash that we are going to see in the market. So if we were to map this one out, this is purely hypothetical. What if the Red Sea was resolved this year? As you can see, then 2025 would be the bottom of cyclical downturn. But I would caution anyone about calling this a disaster, because it wouldn't be. It would be a fairly normal cyclical downturn. It would be akin to the bottom of the market we saw in 2015, early 16. It will not be matching the real disaster we saw in 2009 when we had the financial crisis. So that it's also important to put in context. Yes, freight rates will crash. Yes, carriers will likely be quite loss-making for a few quarters before they pull capacity out, but it's not a disaster. It's a normal run-of-the-mill cyclical downturn. Then I'm going to jump over to the topic that Peter was also talking about initially. I put it under the headline of America First suggestions. And my perspective here is not really from a political angle. Politically, I mean, it is very clear that the driver behind these initiatives is to strengthen U.S. shipping. It's to strengthen U.S. shipbuilding. The U.S. is not the only one with that ambition. I mean, China obviously have had it with success for several decades. India has a similar political strategy. They aim for a goal where 20% of the world's ships should be built in India by 2047, so that the US having an ambition to strengthen shipbuilding and strengthen the US fleet is not really unique. My entry point is different. If I look at the USTR 301 proposal, or the $1 million fee proposal, or whatever people know it by, I look at the practical ramifications of the proposal as it is. Not what the political intentions are, but what are the real life consequences. And I see a proposal that will not really strengthen any kind of American shipping, but it will have enormous costs. And there's going to be ripple effects from those costs. I sat down and looked through it and tried to model just for container shipping, if implemented as it's suggested, and if the carriers don't change anything in their networks, this will cost $24 billion a year. And that's basically only US importers and exporters are going to pay. On average, that's $1,000 per 40 foot for every import and export box. In some trades, that is a fee that is higher than the freight rate itself these days. Then there is the mandate that Peter also mentioned, to use to some degree US flag and US built vessels. To me, it's very unclear whether that's even physically possible. Some might think at least you can flag other ships in on the US flag, but I'm not sure there's even enough skilled mariners to man those ships if they were to be done to this degree. And building US ships, That would be an undertaking that likely should be measured on a 10 to 20-year scale if something was to be attained. But the proposal here is looking at a much shorter time frame, and it appears not physically possible to actually achieve this. So if it's implemented as is, and I sincerely, especially for US importers and exporters, hope not, the initial one will be fewer court posts per strain. I mean, Peter was mentioning that the MSC's CEO, that's the largest container line, had mentioned that they would cut back on smaller port calls. Zim has also followed suit, saying they will do the same. More dramatically, you've had the smaller niche carriers like Tropical Shipping, ACL, and Seaboard Marine, either saying they're going to drop some services or pull entirely out of the US, which I would also expect was going to happen, because the fee is per vessel regardless of size. And there's certainly a difference whether you come with a 10,000 TEU ship or a 200 TEU ship. This would to some degree be a death knell for all of the smaller niche services and be very, very problematic in the Caribbean. That would mean more cargo through Canada and Mexico, and it would not take long before we would then have hopeless congestion in the ports in Canada and Mexico, and also in those large ports in US that would still get the port calls. And this is where it becomes real interesting because, again, as I mentioned, if we have learned anything over the last 5 years, is that congestion removes vessels from the equation. That reduces capacity. A lack of capacity increases freight rates. So if this is implemented as it is, you're going to see long lines of vessels, again, outside, for example, Los Angeles, Long Beach. And as we could see during the pandemic, and then actually during the Red Sea as well, the freight rate increases that follows from a lack of capacity can easily dwarf the $1,000 they would have to pay in fees for using Chinese ships. So the 24 billion or the $1,000 per container, that's based on the fees. But if this leads to congestion, the associated increase in freight rates could actually be much more severe than this. So I think I've been out with this also ever since USTR came out. I'm just an analyst. I'm not even sitting in the US, so I'm simply looking at what are the realistic repercussions of implementing this one as is. And the repercussions is basically this is going to have a hefty cost to US importers and exporters. It is unlikely, at least in the time frame given, to in any meaningful way strengthen US shipbuilding. Will it stop trade? Of course it will not. I can be slightly cynical here and say, again, look at the pandemic. There were shippers that were paying $15,000, $20,000 freight rates. Did some go out of business? Yes, they did. Did global trade stop? No, it did not. That favored some types of shippers over others. It's going to severely skew the market. There's going to be winners and losers. But in this case, the interesting part is one of the winners for this would actually end up being the container lines. Not that I think for a second that any of them are actually rooting for this. I genuinely believe they are not. Genuinely believe they are also pointing out the huge problems with this. But if it is implemented and we get congestion and freight rates go up by thousands of dollars, this is going to make the large container lines very, very profitable once again. Going to go through this one relatively quickly. We got a lot of other geopolitical challenges, so it's worthwhile keeping an eye on. We just want to add one more word on the Red Sea Gaza situation. We tend to focus on the Red Sea because the problems are the Houthis, and indeed it is, as it is right now. As we know, the Houthis are backed by the Iranians. The concern should be if this then is a conflict that expands beyond the Houthis to actually include attacks on Iran, that would place the Strait of Hormuz into the firing zone as well. If it impacts the Strait of Hormuz, there are already analyses out that this would cause a doubling of oil prices. That would also be a significant impact to the shipping industry and to the overall, to any shipper that actually uses energy anywhere else. The Russia-Ukraine war is likely to get an indirect impact. I can easily see a scenario where this leads to a demand boom for container shipping into Europe here in 2025 and in 2026. Because the indirect impact of the US change in their position towards Russia means that EU is now rapidly proceeding down a path of rearmament. That means about 800 billion euros now set aside for military rearmament. That's a lot of money going into manufacturing in Europe. There's going to be materials and components to be imported, and the boost to the economy itself is likely going to create a demand boom for container shipping into Europe. Panama Canal is the one thing, at least from an operational perspective, I would not worry about. Yes, it's a geopolitical hot potato between the US and Panama still, but if Panama has it, they will do whatever they can to operate it. If the US has it, they would operate it. So for people that use it for shipping purposes, it will still remain open no matter how much of a political hot potato it is. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Canada and Greenland. I would then more point to the next potential troublesome spot. That will be the Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait, which is likely to be a flashpoint as well. Less likely, but still should be on everybody's radar, is the South China Sea, where, of course, for the better part of a couple of decades, China is insisting it is their ocean. They are doing what they can to, at times, harass also commercial shipping going through that strait. Decarbonization and environment. Here in April, there's a meeting coming up in the IMO. Actually, there's meetings in that's called the MEPC group. That's where they tend to decide on all matters environment for shipping. There's meetings in April and October. And the one coming up here in April, the intention for that meeting is for the IMO countries to agree on binding measures to try to achieve the decarbonization targets for 2030, 40, and 50. There's a lot of shipping lines, also some of the major container lines that are lobbying hard for what at best can be described as a global carbon tax on marine fossil fuels. Whether they will be successful remains to be seen. They are at least optimistic that that's going to happen. My view on this is, if that happens, we are likely going to see a partial fragmentation. I cannot see a scenario wherein, for example, the US under the current administration would ratify that. I cannot see a Trump administration agreeing to a global carbon tax on shipping with money going into a UN body for use. That's just not going to happen. So what we're going to end up with, if the IMO agrees on that, is a global legislation that is not going to be enforced everywhere. And that's going to lead to a very lopsided competitive environment where, rest assured, some shipping lines will live up to the spirit of the law. Some shipping lines will offer services for whatever loopholes they can find. That is how shipping typically operates. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. As an outside scenario on that one, I could potentially also see this as a trigger point for the US to pull out of IMO, which would create a lot of additional problems for shipping down the line. So in finishing up here, this litany of disasters that we seem to be facing, what else should we be looking at here in 2025? One thing to keep an eye out on is US Customs. For two different reasons. One is they have not been dosed yet. It might not be. I certainly cannot see, especially border agents in uniform, being dosed at all. I could potentially see that happen to people sitting behind a desk, but I'm not sure it would happen. But even if it doesn't, the tariff tsunami where we started out is going to make customs a lot more complicated, which means more work for the customs agents. So there is a significant risk of a scenario where US Customs itself becomes a bottleneck in the supply chain in 2025. That is going to impact not only seaports, also airports, also land borders. I've already early on here mentioned we could see a US recession and we could see an EU demand boom. The last one here that I haven't mentioned so far is one to also be mindful of. We have been saying for over a year that Suez is closed. Of course, it's not. It's the southern Red Sea. But if we see a further escalation in the Middle East, potentially if there's a follow-through to try to basically displace all Palestinians out of Gaza, a very realistic scenario there is an escalation of hostilities to the point where I would be genuinely concerned there would also be taken potshot at ships literally in the Suez Canal itself, significantly worsening the situation compared to what we have right now. So with that, unfortunately, yes, this is a litany of problems, but we are faced with an exceedingly unpredictable 2025, also beyond the level of unpredictability we're used to. I mean, we always have unpredictability. Is the economy suddenly going to go into a recession? Will we get a major strike? All of these are uncertainties we are used to. But on the regulatory side right now in the US, things are changing with a magnitude and a pace and an unpredictability we have not seen before. That makes it very, very hard to make any kind of long-term planning until we reach a more stable situation. And we are faced with a geopolitical world also with major flashpoints that can change shipping setups rapidly. Again, the Red Sea is the single most largest impact on shipping over the last year and will continue to be so coming into this year. So with that, I'm not sure I was able to fully keep within the 20 minutes that you mentioned. Stas, sorry about that.
No, you did great, Lars, and you covered a lot of territory, and I am very grateful to you. Lars, China has a major investment in shipbuilding. It's been an investment over a long period of time. That's not going to be swatted away anytime soon. And I read that China has taken 74% of the new shipbuilding orders for the next year so far. If the U.S. is going to mount a credible challenge, what does it give me 3 things that it needs to do?
No, so from my perspective, and again, now I'm going to sound extremely simplistic, but from my perspective, this is extremely simple. Shipping lines globally respond extremely well to incentives. But you can either use the carrot or the stick. You can either go and threaten them, which is basically what is being suggested with this one. Say, we're going to give you fines unless you do something else. And shipping lines always do the same thing in the face of a threat. They will look for whatever loopholes they can to find the second cheapest option. They don't care what the objective is. They will just look for what's the second cheapest option. That's the stick. It works very poorly. The carrot, that is what actually Korea did before China, and then what China did, make it cheaper. Okay, build our ships with us, you get a better business model. Rest assured, they will absolutely respond to that. The caveat, of course, is there has for decades been direct and indirect subsidies in shipbuilding, first in Korea and now in China. And of course, that's a cost for the nations involved. If the US really want to do this, the simple answer, and I know this is going to sound slightly callous, but that is throw money at it. Don't expect this to be up and running in 3, 5, 7 years. This is something that's going to take 10, 20 years to build up. But if you make it economically attractive for shipping lines to build ships or to flag ships into the US, they will absolutely do it. But that would, of course, also mean it will become visible up front how costly this is going to be.
Very good. Thank you. I'm opening up for questions. If you want to raise your hand or come in here, we are open. I mean, you've got a chance here to talk to one of the world's experts. And Dave Arsenault, I know that you're a knowledgeable man and you would definitely have an insightful question. So I'm going to ask you if you could come in here.
All right, Stas.
No pressure, Dave.
No pressure. Hi, Lars. Actually, Lars, thank you for that presentation. Very, very well done. And I think very, very comprehensive. But kind of triggering off of your last statement, you know, if you go back, the U.S. had something known as the Construction Differential Subsidy, CDS, that was in place that I think sunset around the early 80s, because even with the subsidy by the U.S. government to incentivize shipbuilding in U.S. shipyards, as the cost differential to foreign shipyards continued to widen, that CDS wasn't adequate enough when we started to see a 3, 4, and 5x differential in costs. Do you see that possibly coming back into play as kind of a subset of this initiative that we've been discussing here with the penalties?
Not necessarily, as you can probably hear. I mean, I don't see penalties solving that problem in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. But what I do see subsidy schemes such as that one being a potential tool if there is a serious political will to actually try to address this problem. I mean, it's not just a CDS. There was also, forgive me if I remember the acronyms wrong, but what was it? The military sea leave program, where there was also subsidies to be had, where fine is foreign shipping lines, they built the ships. But then, of course, there is a clause in it that if the military needs it for whatever purpose, you have to lend it out to the military.
Right. That was the operating differential subsidy, the ODS.
Yeah. Okay. So the US have had this in the past. Was it then successful? That depends on what you measure by successful, because clearly the other shipping nation gave even better incentives. And it's not just a matter of government incentives, it's also down to what are the sheer costs of building it? What are the costs of your workers, for example? That's simply a thing.
Okay, thank you. Ron Brown, you had a question. Do you want to come in here?
Yeah, I do. And good morning, Lars. It's good to see you. Saw you at TPM, and your presentation there was just as exciting and eventful. My question, as you might imagine, being that we were the port that was called out at TPM, what then would you expect the smaller ports to do? I mean, we can't just do nothing or sit on our hands and let it happen. We've got to figure out some strategy to respond, to be competitive, to try to retain cargo movement through our ports, or and maybe I'm revealing something that I've been thinking about. Come up with some competitive schemes to get the remaining carriers to bring cargo to the smaller ports. So you can't expect them to do nothing. I guess that's my point.
No, we can't expect smaller ports to do nothing. And if we take, for example, the scenario LALB versus Oakland, I also don't see a scenario where you get 0 ships into Oakland, but I see a scenario where if my ship is with 80% of cargo to Los Angeles and 20% to Oakland, no, I'm not going to go to Oakland, at least not on 4 of my 5 services, but then work on the carriers and say, fine, what about then just one service, but then you don't go to Los Angeles on that one, still the same vessel size. But now, if you can then coordinate, especially also, I mean, Oakland is a large export port, coordinate and make it worth their while, say, fine, at least one of the services go in, because if it's 100% cargo to one port, then it doesn't matter whether that port is Los Angeles or whether that port is Oakland. But it requires that you can coordinate it to the degree that the carriers believe, fine, I can actually fill an entire ship for also a smaller port in its own right.
Okay. Peter Friedman, let me ask you to come in here. If smaller ports become impacted by whatever comes out of this process, what would be the impact to your exporters? You're on mute, Peter.
Detrimental in the extreme. During the testimony, the person on the panel questioning us, the one from the Department of Transportation, asked me specifically, what about those smaller ports? Don't we need those smaller ports? And of course, the Department of Transportation and MARAD, you know, they're invested in ports more so than some of the other agencies. And I said, listen, don't think of Oakland. She asked, you know, well, one California port in Southern California gets the business, but Northern California doesn't. I said, don't think of Oakland as a Northern California port. Think of it as the port from Kansas, Arkansas, all those places, Minnesota, all of them, North Dakota, all the places where agriculture comes out of, Iowa, Missouri, where Burlington Northern and other trains, you know, several trains actually, go from the Midwest to our export destinations. And if one wants to get to agriculture's largest export market, which is the Asia Pacific, you want to go through a port that's the last port of call, the last port on the way out, because you need to expedite many of the highest value agriculture exports, the protein, pork and beef. You want to go out of Oakland. And that's why Oakland has such phenomenal cold storage capacity. And the rail lines run to Oakland. And so Oakland is the preferred port for many in this agriculture sector, not all, but many. And so we need to keep that port viable, because you don't have the time it takes to go through some of these larger, more congested, more competitive ports if you want to keep agriculture viable overseas, particularly for our highest value agriculture exports. Now, finally, I would point out that all this doom and gloom, don't take it so seriously. It's just a joke. It's April Fool's Day. It's not actually happening. No tariff. No
no.
tariff.
Okay. Matthew.
Yes. So we've obviously been dealing with this quite a bit with our beneficial cargo owners and our ship owners, particularly in the dry bulk space, which I know is probably less of a focus for many of the people on the call. But even at the $1.5 million tax level, I mean, just to contextualize that, a normal port cost for a dry bulker calling U.S. East Coast or West Coast was like $200,000. So escalating to $1.5 million is a huge delta. And the margins on these products are incredibly thin. That kind of a penalty you're talking about on a kind of a typical Panamax, you're talking like 50 cents a bushel on wheat. That's well outside the bounds of any kind of normal range on what wheat trades in. So that crushes Montana, North Dakota, Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon. That entire wheat trade gets murdered by $1.5 million in extra port costs. Coal, that's like, $15 to $18 a ton in a commodity that trades in nickels on the margins. So, watch the U.S. coal industry get creamed. And as much as people like this, as much as the current administration likes to talk about coal and, its use in power, the U.S. coal industry is largely about the export of metallurgical coal at this point. That's where all the value is. And that trade is about to get walloped if these port costs come into effect. The impact of this, there's a lot. Everybody here is in the world of shipping in one way or another, and certainly we can't figure out any grand strategy behind this that makes any sense for importers, exporters, or U.S. consumers. But that being what it is, our business is in dealing with the volatility and watching the trade flows change. And, we're certainly seeing the Canadian ports due for a huge increase in demand, much like Lars suggested on the bulk side or on the container side. We see the same thing on the bulk side. And I have to imagine, Peter, that many of those Midwestern agricultural exporters are going to be turning much of their attention to Vancouver, Prince Rupert, Thunder Bay, Montreal, where they're well connected on the CP or the CN, and trying to get their product out that way. And the market will react. Shippers are flexible, as you pointed out, Lars. And I can't see any scenario at this point that doesn't basically end up being U.S. ag interests taking a small haircut while handing the majority of the job and economic benefit from transportation to the Canadians, which, God bless the Canadians, they're wonderful, but that certainly doesn't jive with what we're seeing coming out of the government. So I don't know. I guess I'm just talking, but if any of you, Peter or Lars, have any comments related to that, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on where you see this all shaking out. The U.S. This whole thing with Chinese ships. It's not just Chinese ships, right? They're going to put a tax on any owner that has a Chinese ship in their fleet.
Even any owner that has a ship on order in a Chinese yard, even though they don't have any Chinese ships themselves.
Which is every fleet in the world. And, yes, shipping is immensely flexible, and there are probably people in Cyprus who are already, juggling their fleets to put all the Japanese ships in one fleet and all the Chinese ships in another fleet and build a whole mess of corporate shells to, divorce themselves from their interest. But of course, all those, non-Chinese fleets will just raise their prices by $1.499 million. And everybody ends up still paying the same fee.
Right.
But this is where we get the challenge, right? Because it's easy to move the ships around. You can't move the railroads around. So while the
Right.
ships, they could then go up to Canada, you can't magically expand the capacity on the railroads beyond what's already there. That's going to be the bottleneck.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
Already for much agriculture, certainly from the northern Great Plains, the preferred route is on the Canadian rail through Vancouver and actually to Prince Rupert. Already, that's the preferred route for many. So that's one. Thank you, Matthew. There's a lot to discuss here, and my prediction is that by the time the light of day shines upon this, there's going to be a lot of revisions. I don't think Walmart and Amazon carry any clout whatsoever because people are saying, so what, $600, $800 a container increase? Big deal. Look at what we paid during COVID. I'm not saying that, but that's what's being said. But as you said, Matthew, these products that we export are trading pennies on the bushel, pennies on the pound. So we can't absorb anything. So your kid will pay 25 cents more for a pair of Nikes, or 25, or $2 more for a pair of Nikes rather than some other brand. But the hogs in China, they don't care where their soybeans come from.
That's right.
Lars, let me ask you.
Excuse me, I have to step out.
Okay.
It's been an honor to be on the same program with Lars. Staff, great job putting this together. Thank you very much. Thanks all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Always great to be with you.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Peter.
Bye. Lars, the Gemini example is going in a different direction. It's starting to use more transshipments, and Hapag and Maersk are showing a 90% reliability rate based on the data that you've shown. Is that likely to be a pattern that may come in here that would impact smaller ports versus larger ports?
From a US perspective, not really. And you can say the simple part is there is no really transshipment pattern over in the US to start with, courtesy of the Jones Act. So that's where the setup, if you look at, for example, the Gemini setup, it is a lot more large hubs and not so many direct services. But when it comes specifically to services related to the US, that is only the case on the origin side, not over on the US side.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Do we have any last questions?
Hi, Lars. I'm Ethan Lee. So I had one question. You had mentioned that shipping lines will usually kind of like look for loopholes and they respond pretty well to incentives just for their own motives. But if they do look for loopholes, and they will always do that, with like the US passing legislation and like with all the tariffs and stuff, would you say to an extent it's kind of futile for us to pass legislation if the shipping lines will just look for the next best alternative?
Depends on what the objective is. If the objective is to strengthen US shipbuilding, then yes, this is futile. It's not going to happen. Simple as that. Because keep in mind, maybe to put this in context, I often come across, we talk about the world has been globalized, right? We operate here in an industry that's been global for 1,000 years. Every single shipping company is an absolute master at this game. Otherwise, they wouldn't have survived. And they thrive brilliantly in an environment where you've got 200 countries, 200 different legislations. If one country changes their legislation, they will just look at creatively, okay, what is now the next lowest cost? That's what they always do. That is what they are extremely good at. And this might sound slightly provocative. That's intended. For many of these shipping lines, the US is not the largest market in the world. Simple as that. I mean, these are global shipping lines, and sure, the US is a large market, but it certainly is not the majority of the market. So for many of them, this is not a matter of the US being able to dictate how they run their business models. That's just not going to happen.
Something that we need to be aware of. The world is changing, and we are not always changing with it.
And again, you would say that's also why I mentioned India, for example. I'm not sure India will be successful either, by the way, but their ambition to suddenly, right now they are building, I believe, 0.5% of ships in the world. They want to build 20% of ships in the world by 2047. And their approach is to make it cheaper to build ships in India, to reduce the regulation, to make it easier to set up, to give subsidies. So again, they're trying with a carrot. As I mentioned, I'm not necessarily sure they will be successful, but if the US is serious about ramping up shipbuilding, it also needs to realize this is not just in competition with China, Korea, and Japan. This is in competition now with a rapidly growing India that's also want to take a large share of the pie. I don't even see that reflected in any of the strategy papers around US shipbuilding.
Yeah. Lars, I want to thank you very much for your time and your insights, and I echo what Peter said before. You're our oracle, so whenever we want to make sure we understand what's going on, it's always good to talk to you, and I want to thank you for that.
I know we're running out of time. Just one final comment here.
Sure.
Under normal market circumstances, I would have taken one look at that USTR proposal with $1 million fees and immediately concluded we don't need to spend time on it. Because I'm not going to be diplomatic here. This is so obviously stupid in relation to what it wants to achieve that this would be dismissed out of hand. It would have absolutely no chance to go anywhere. The fact that so many people have spent so much time on it the last couple of months shows that apparently there is people in the administration that are somewhat detached from reality, let's put it that way. But there also seems to be sufficiently many, especially in the US, because sure, I think there were about 600 replies coming in on this hearing. If we are being honest here, the only replies that actually matter would be the ones that come from US companies. Replies that come from foreign companies probably don't carry very much weight anyway. But there is an overwhelming amount of input coming from actual US companies far beyond what we usually see. So at least for me, this also carries some belief that if it is not completely taken off the table, then it is likely going to be kicked off to the side. So, well, somebody needs to take a second look at this, and then we might discuss it again, say 6-12 months down the line, when hopefully somebody that knows something about shipping has been involved in trying to draft the second version.
Very good. And that's very good advice, Lars. And I want to thank you. I want to remind everybody the Propeller Club of Northern California has its Maritime Day, May 21st. And it's at Scott's. We're going to have Pesha there. The ILWU is presenting. We are going to have Ann McIntyre from the Bar Pilots, Tori Presti from National Shipping. We are going to have our own Nick Marone from the Seafarers Union. And we invite you to join with us. It's May 21st. And it's on the website. Please don't forget it. We have a diverse crowd, and I forgot Robert Wilkins from the Seamen's Church is going to be speaking. So please join us at that time. We are going to have this presentation. The video is recorded. We will make it available to everybody. We usually do it in about 24 hours. So with that, I want to thank everybody who participated. Lars, it's late at night for Lars. Lars, you're really amazing. You're in 12 different countries every time I take a look at you. And I still haven't forgotten that you spent that week in the Falkland Islands, island hopping, which it's a very unusual tourist activity that you're involved in, as well as your trip to Antarctica. So for our intrepid traveler, Mr. Jensen, and good friend, and I should say one other thing, many of us continue to have a close relationship with our European allies who have stuck with us through thick and thin since and even before World War II. They are under attack. The situation in the Ukraine is known by everybody. The aggressor was Russia. There is no doubt. The aggression could go to other countries in the future. Europe is ramping up. We should not be abandoning our allies. Americans have never run from a fight, and we should not do so now. I'm Stas Margaronis, Propeller Club of Northern California. I hope you are all continue to be prosperous and be well, and we will see you soon. And Lars Jensen, once again, thank you very much.